Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I am thrilled to have with us Michael Beckel, who is a senior researcher at Issue One. Issue One is a nonprofit, nonpartisan group that not only investigates money in politics, but the broader issue of threats to our democracy. Welcome, Michael. It's great to meet you.
Great to be here today. Thank you.
Well, it's appropriate rather that your background is in green and your shirt is in green because we are talking about the color of money. Now, as some of our viewers may have read, there was a very long piece in the New Yorker by David Kirkpatrick, and he attempts to denominate the amount of money Trump has made off of the presidency, whether that's in crypto investors, some of them are foreigners, whether that's in advertising his own properties. Give us a sense of how much worse things are in terms of the Trump money-making machine in Trump 2.0 than they were in Trump 1.0, when we were just talking about like visits to the Trump Hotel. Seems penny ante by comparison.
Yeah, I think there's so many things about Trump 1.0 that seem quaint in comparison to Trump 2.0. There is so much money flowing and sloshing into the political system right now, and so much flowing and sloshing into the pockets of Donald Trump and his family. We have seen billions of dollars in self-enrichment from public service, which is a real disservice to our political system. When politicians act in a corrupt manner, it reduces the public's trust in government. When trust in government is eroded, the public is more likely to accept corruption as the norm. And that creates a vicious cycle that perpetuates and further weakens our democracy and our system of checks and balances.
We do have constitutional provisions that are supposed to prevent this. This is what the founders were very concerned about. We have emoluments clauses, but they don't work by themselves. If Congress doesn't act, if the courts won't enforce them, this kind of goes on and on. What kind of reforms in a future Congress do you think we would need in order to really enforce this, or would we need completely new legislation that just bans this kind of behavior?
I think it's a little bit of both. There are a lot of existing rules that could and should be enforced in cases like this. And these are threats that could occur under Democratic or Republican presidencies
Right.
alike.
Right.
You have seen a lot of conservatives in the past being concerned about executive overreach. And unfortunately, in too many cases today, we're hearing crickets on some very, very serious questions. But I think that there is a growing concern among Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike that stronger anti-corruption guardrails are needed. Politicians shouldn't be profiteering from public service, whether you're a
Right.
member of Congress or the president. And this particular president hasn't divested in a meaningful way, has continued to see his brand elevated through the use of a lot of public resources going to a lot of his properties towards politicians who want to ingratiate themselves by hosting events at his properties, through foreign interests who want to curry favor with the administration going to his properties. And even more than that, they're entering into business deals, many business deals overseas. This is the first president, first lady to ever have their own meme coins, these cryptocurrency products that literally anybody in the world can be buying and pumping money into the personal checking accounts and savings accounts of the people who should be our number one public servants.
It is shocking at some level. We try not to get inured to it, but when you take a step back, it is really stunning. There's another way in which corruption has been elevated, and that is in the administration's really clampdown on investigation of corruption, investigation of foreign practices, investigation of foreigners who come here and engage in political activity. Talk to us a little bit about that and the danger in allowing this conduct really to go undetected.
Yeah, I think one really striking case study of all of this is a Chinese-born crypto billionaire named Justin Sun. For years and years, Justin Sun wouldn't set foot in the United States for fear of legal troubles. He has started a crypto exchange that the experts who monitor these things say is responsible for about half of all illegal crypto activity online. And he's been investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC literally earlier this year paused its investigations into Justin Sun, in part in the sequence of events is just really telling. After Trump was elected, Justin Sun pumped tens of millions of dollars into Trump's World Liberty financial company, literally lining the pockets of Donald Trump and his family with tens of millions of dollars by entering into that business agreement. He's now a business partner with the Trump family on the World Liberty financial side of things. And additionally, Justin Sun is the number one backer of Trump's meme coin. So he invested millions of dollars more into the meme coin earlier this year when Trump and his allies had that big VIP gala in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. They invited the top 220 investors in Trump's meme coin to this gathering. Justin Sun was number one, and he was among the top 25 who got a special VIP tour of the White House. So to go from a guy who literally is avoiding travel to the United States to being feted and given a VIP tour of the White House, I think this is just a quintessential example of how this administration feels like a powder keg of corruption scandals waiting to explode, that there should be guardrails, there should be investigations, there should be more concern about the ways that influence peddling is happening. And instead, we're seeing over and over and over again law enforcement cases being paused, stopped, ceased into major political donors and major backers of Trump and his political machine and his business empire. And that is a cause of grave concern.
It does seem that we're inching towards a kind of gangster state, whether it's universities or media companies where Trump extracts settlements from them, in order to flow into his own pockets. And that we have never seen before. Unfortunately, in another area, we've seen it before, but it has just escalated, and that is dark money in politics. These are millions and millions of dollars. We don't know who the donors are, and it flows into the political system, into candidates, into causes, into Supreme Court confirmation fights. How did we get here, and how do we stop it?
Yeah, that's a very big question, Jen. The long story is that this is the culmination of more than 15 years or even decades of a coordinated attempt to weaken campaign finance laws in the post-Watergate era. You know, people were outraged in the 1970s at some of the things that were happening during the Nixon administration. And the amounts of money today are just astronomical compared to what was causing scandal then. It wasn't helped in 2020, 15 years ago, when the US Supreme Court's Citizens United ruling allowed corporations, including certain types of nonprofit corporations, to spend unlimited amounts of money in politics. And in this post-Citizens United era, we've seen an explosion of super PACs, which are raising huge amounts of money. We've seen an explosion of dark money groups, sometimes buying their own ads, sometimes pumping money into super PACs to be the major funders of these groups that are supposed to be transparent. And so there's a lot of ways that dark money from opaque sources is flowing into the political process right now. And I think one of the other really notable things about this moment in history is that the president has never controlled such a large war chest when he's not running for re-election. So his
Exactly.
political operation continues to have a super PAC that is raising massive amounts of money, a dark money operation that's raising massive amounts of money. And that's on top of his inaugural committee raising more money than any other inaugural committee ever raised in US history before, too. So there's so many ways that special interests are finding to try to curry favor with this administration, ingratiate themselves with the president and his allies, and the number of million-dollar, multi-million-dollar investments that these donors are making aren't being made out of the goodness of their heart. They're being made because they think that there is going to be a return on those types of financial investments.
Exactly. Now, Citizens United was a Supreme Court constitutional decision. A new Supreme Court could reverse this, or theoretically, we could have an amendment to the Constitution. But are there other things we can do theoretically if we had the political will in Congress and the president legislatively to end some of this, to require disclosure, to tax at 100% super PACs, things like that, that would suppress or at least minimize this corruption?
Yeah, I think one of the approaches that many of your listeners may have been exposed to over the past several years is this fight for a constitutional amendment, a new Congress could tackle legislation in a meaningful way to provide more transparency to some of this money coming into the system. And I will also point out that there's been some really interesting activity at the state level that is still being litigated, still ongoing. There was a ballot measure, for instance, in Maine last year, where 75% of Maine residents, so all across the political spectrum in Maine, 75% of Mainers voted to say, even if super PACs are allowed to accept or even if super PACs are allowed to spend unlimited amounts of money, they shouldn't be allowed to accept unlimited amounts of money, especially in an era when super PACs and politicians are working so closely together that there is a risk of quid pro quo corruption or the appearance of corruption in these large super PAC contributions. So that case is currently being litigated in the First Circuit. And just recently, just a couple weeks ago in Montana, there's a new ballot measure proposal that is actually looking at corporate charters as a way to say what powers do the states grant corporations, and why are we all assuming that corporations should have the power to spend unlimited amounts of money in politics? So this ballot measure in Montana would be a way to stop corporate spending and dark money spending at its root and revise the law that governs corporations, including dramatic changes to how they would be able to spend money in campaigns and elections.
Wow, that's fascinating. So let's take a big step back and look at the bigger picture. It doesn't seem that this system is popular with anybody other than the billionaires and the politicians who are getting the money. Um, if politicians began to run on this issue, committing to campaign finance reform, committing to transparency, what is the public polling? What's the public opinion tell you about how that would be received?
There has been polling that shows that this is a major concern for voters all across the political spectrum. In fact, there's been polling that has shown that the presidential candidate who is viewed as more likely to tackle corruption is the one who has been prevailing in our recent presidential elections. In part, you've seen groups like End Citizens United build up a very large, robust campaign urging Democratic candidates to take the issue of campaign finance reform seriously, to reject corporate PAC money, to signal to voters that they don't want to do business as usual in Washington. And even if there hasn't been quite as coordinated an effort on the right, you still see folks several of the Freedom Caucus folks have been very vocal about the way that committee seats and committee assignments are almost auctioned off in Washington. This fundraising pressure that the national parties put on House members, where each committee basically comes with a price. If you want to serve on the Armed Services Committee, you're expected to raise a certain dollar amount. But if you want to serve on the Financial Services Committee, you're expected to raise even more. And if you want to be a subcommittee chairman or the chairman, you're expected to raise even more and more. And so I think, there are voices on the right and on the left who have called attention to some of these broken elements of the current system. It's just very difficult for either party to want to unilaterally disarm and give up a weapon that they see the other side using, which is why over the last 15 years, while conservatives and Republicans were some of the first to adapt to the post-Citizens United world and embrace dark money, in the last several elections, liberal dark money groups have been outspending conservative ones. So there's, this perpetual arms race, both sides wanting to take advantage of every tool that they have in their disposal, when really both sides should have an interest in not getting beat up by anonymous dark money attack ads that are spreading lies to their constituents. And if we had some more disclosure and had some more transparency about the top funders of these groups, I think the public would really be served by that additional transparency coming into the system.
Well, this is fascinating, Michael. And unfortunately, I think there's going to be much, much more to talk about in the next 3.5 years, since we now seem to be breaking through every norm, every guardrail, every blinking red light. So we will be sure to have you back. Thanks so much. And thanks for your work on anti-corruption efforts and for issue 1. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.